Greetings, Starfighters. Welcome to the last Shameless Cashgrab of 2018. And the last episode was a classic, and the next one is going to be a classic too. Hammer has been a name in horror for so long, it is amazing that I have actually never seen one of their pictures before. I got into horror a little late in life, around the time the first Scream came out, actually. And, I got on a horror kick, and I checked out, every horror movie I could get from my local library. And I saw some of the classics, and some not so classic. I'm still not entirely sure what the hell Pinocchio's Revenge was. But I never got to see any of the Hammer horror films. Well, that changes now with Count Dracula and His Vampire Bride, starring Peter Cushing and the one, the only, Christopher motherfucking Lee.
And now I have watched Count Dracula and His Vampire Bride. Plot summary, courtesy of Letterboxd. The police and British security forces call in Professor Van Helsing to help them investigate a satanic ritual which had been occurring in a large country house and which has been attended by a government minister, an eminent scientist, and a Secret Service chief. The owner of the house is a mysterious property tycoon who was found to be behind a sinister plot involving a deadly plague. It is in fact Dracula, who, sick of his interminable existence, has decided that he must end it all in the only way possible, by destroying every last potential victim. Okay, so I learned something the day I searched for this movie on Letterboxd to add it to my film diary. It has an alternate title, one that it is actually apparently much more known by. Much like how a couple of the movies from the Strange Things set were also listed under different titles, Count Dracula and His Vampire Bride is known, like I said, to more people, as the Satanic Rites of Dracula. That's certainly a cheery little title, huh? Well, it certainly makes more sense, but more on that in a moment. It is also apparently the last of the Hammer horror movies that Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing did together as Dracula and Van Helsing, respectively, though Cushing would reprise the Van Helsing role one more time after this one. Nothing quite like starting a series with the penultimate entry, right? Oh well, I never watched a Rocky movie until I saw Creed, and that turned out alright. So alright, in fact, I went and saw Creed 2 in theaters. And just last week from when I'm writing this script here anyway. But I digress, frequently. The movie opens with a ceremony that's probably what conservative evangelicals think a D&D session is like, and less than 3 minutes in and we have nudity. Am I going to have to give this set a time to tits counter too? Jokes aside, it is a very cliche sequence. Honestly, you show me about a 30-second or so chunk of this ceremony from this movie, and ask me to determine is it from this movie or some other 70s movie that involves satanic cults, and I would probably not be sure. I saw some comments about this film on Letterboxd after watching the movie. I try to avoid spoilers whenever possible, that suggested this movie maybe started as just a satanic cult movie, but had Dracula and Van Helsing shoehorned in later, and honestly, I believe it. Now, that in itself is not inherently a bad thing. The third Die Hard movie, a lot of fun, if not quite up to par with the first two, but that started out as an original script called Simon Says. Now, but does that work with the Satanic Rites of Dracula? Hard to say. I think I'm at something of a disadvantage here, seeing as mentioned previously, this is the second to last film in a franchise where I've not seen any of the others. But something that certainly doesn't help is that it takes more than 20 minutes for one of the main characters to show up. I mean, imagine if you went to see Captain America the Winter Soldier and you don't see Chris Evans until a quarter of the way in. That's what we're looking at here. I mean, not that I need the leads to necessarily be there from frame one. Nothing wrong with a slow burn, after all. And it's not like the 20 minutes are boring. We set up the cult. A government official gets either kidnapped or killed. That part is kept ambiguous until later. Kidnapped or killed by the cult's minions. We have an escaped prisoner of the cult who manages to tell his story before he dies, etc. And now that I write this down for the script, I think the problem here is on the viewer end, not the film end. I got so jazzed about finally seeing one of the Cushing-Lee vampire movies that I simply got impatient. So, you know what? Okay, it's not that big a deal that it's 20 minutes before we see Van Helsing. Speaking of, Peter Cushing. I appreciate his performance as Van Helsing once he enters the film. So many other actors take on that role in one of two directions. A raving madman who just happens to be right, or an action hero badass type. Or if you're in the Guy Madden film, a leering perv. But at least of the versions I've seen, and, feel free to correct me in the comments on that, it's madman or badass. Those are generally the two ways they go. Of course, now that I've actually asked for those kind of comments, I won't get them. But anyway, Cushing plays Van Helsing way more professorial than that. Professorial. Okay, Google Docs insists that isn't a word, but I swear I've heard it used before, so I say it is. Anyway, I respect how, even after all the real supernatural shenanigans that he's seen over the years, he still keeps a skeptical eye about him, not willing to dismiss out of hand that something could have been faked. It's more nuanced than one expects from a supernatural horror movie, where basically everything is real. It grounds the movie that even in a universe where vampires and zombies exist, though not in the Romero sense, and we only see one in the movie, who I'm pretty sure just disappears after the first act, that you still have con artists and the like. Now, Van Helsing we didn't get for 20 minutes. It's at 31 minutes and 34 seconds that Christopher Lee finally makes his entrance. That's fine. The entrance, I mean. A bit underwhelming. He just basically makes some fog and opens a locked door and stands there. And honestly, for several frames, it would be easy to think that it was someone else, although the cape is a bit of a giveaway. His first kill of the movie does sadly have the weight of it brought down by a comical number of zoom-ins on his eyes and those of the woman whose blood he drinks. By about the 5th or 6th zoom is when I started chuckling. But yeah, as referenced in the plot summary, Dracula's ultimate goal in this movie is to commit suicide in the most roundabout way possible, by wiping out humanity with an enhanced strain of the bubonic plague. It's like trying to go on a hunger strike by burning down all the supermarkets. Kind of makes you wonder why he apparently kept making more vampire fledglings while putting this plan into motion, but I guess you could write that off as a compulsion that's unavoidable when one is a vampire. The last half of the movie is centered around trying to stop this plot, so I can skim a bit to the last act, starting with the first meeting in this film of Dracula and Van Helsing. It is also the first time Christopher Lee talks in the movie, at 1 hour and 3 minutes in. Did they only have him for a week, like with Sean Connery on Highlander or something? Anyway, we get more evidence for this movie having been a different script that was turned into a Dracula movie at the last minute by Lee's speech to Cushing. Definitely more Bond villain than vampire. I mean, really, the only difference here between Dracula and your average "the world sucks, so I want to conquer it" bad guy is that the audience knows that Dracula is just straight up lying about his motives. Hang on, I just realized something. I haven't said anything about any of the other main characters, have I? Oh, that's not a good sign. Though to be fair, except for Van Helsing's granddaughter, Jessica, and the detective from Scotland Yard, Murray, last name Murray, I don't really remember any of their names. Now, that in itself isn't that much of a commentary on the film. My family will confirm that I sometimes have trouble remembering the names of characters in movies I like when we're talking about them in the car on the way home from the theater. As in, it's literally been less than a half hour since I just watched this movie that I really like, and I have already forgotten characters' names. But yeah, the day is ultimately saved, which you probably guessed by the fact that I said that there was one more movie with Van Helsing after this. Though really, the heroes of Van Helsing and Murray didn't need to do that much, as Dracula's plan was not very well thought through. Using his human minions as plague characters isn't a bad idea on paper. In the context of the film, it's not a bad idea. I'm not pro-biological weapons. But when the plague kills in minutes and has extremely visible symptoms, these dudes weren't even going to make it past the lawn, let alone out into public to infect people. So this plot fails both as a plan for world conquest and as a Rube Goldbergian suicide attempt for a vampire. Oh, and to just add further insult to injury for our iconic villain, he somehow managed to set up operations near a forest made up of one of the types of trees that can hurt him. The type of tree that, in Van Helsing's words, gave Christ his crown of thorns. And Dracula, while chasing Van Helsing, gets stuck on the thorns. Right before, getting impaled with a fence post. Rather anticlimactic. That would be like if Avengers Endgame ends with Thanos slipping in the shower and hitting his head. And then they'll have Sylvester McCoy come in, put on a Thanos wig, and that joke doesn't really. Let's just move on to the random thoughts section. Apart from all the satanic stuff, the opening act, as I've been sort of alluding to this whole time, really does feel more like the cold open of a Bond film than a vampire movie. In fact, the guy who escaped the cult at the beginning had a mini camera in his watch. Oh shit, this was supposed to be a Bond movie, wasn't it? I mean, I'm pretty sure more people get shot than bitten by vampires in what's supposed to be a vampire movie. It is a bit unfortunate that the only group in the movie with any real gender parity or ethnic diversity is the satanic cult working for Dracula. Query: why does Van Helsing have a charcoal sketch of his arch-nemesis hanging on a wall in his apartment/office? Peter Cushing spends nearly as much time smoking as he does talking in this movie. Oh, 70s. I wonder... Oh, no, it was prostate cancer that killed him. Okay, not lung cancer. Alright, I was wrong. Final verdict. Just to make my main criticism of the film absolutely clear, the vampire aspects of this vampire movie really do feel like an afterthought. Peter Cushing certainly gives a solid performance, so you can't say he didn't take his job seriously, but even still, it's not hard to see why this was the last of these for Christopher Lee, who was barely even in this thing despite having top billing. He certainly came across to me as being tired of this role and ready to move on. I mean, it's like the people at Hammer Horror. They had this script for a satanic cult movie, realized it wasn't working, so one of the executives went, well, shit. Does anybody know if Peter and Chris have anything going this month? I wouldn't call this a bad movie at all, but it was certainly disappointing. Perhaps that's my fault, though. I certainly went in with high expectations. I think when I rank these movies at the end of the season, I'll give this one an extra point or two to compensate for that. That only seems fair. And as I mentioned earlier, the other title of this movie, The Satanic Rites of Dracula, is far more accurate than the title it has on the Mill Creek set. Dracula doesn't even have a bride in this movie, just a harem of vampire women. I guess in that case those would be brides, plural. Well, either way, the title still doesn't work. And the harem in question hardly do much outside the one set piece where they almost kill Van Helsing's granddaughter. And only one of them actually gets any dialogue. And while we're still on the harem, I wonder why the filmmakers put that weird filter over the scene where Murray kills them with a sprinkler system. Yes, really, the sprinkler system. It doesn't make the scene any more dramatic, it's just distracting. The filter, not the sprinkler system. I'd say go ahead and watch this one if you're a completionist for Hammer horror films, Christopher Lee films, vampire films, or all of the above. But maybe watch some of the other ones first. Don't repeat my mistake. Well, that mild letdown out of the way. Next up for us, in the distant future of 2019, I will be watching and talking about Atom Age Vampire from 1960. Sounds like a good old-fashioned B-movie to me, but we'll have to wait and see, won't we?